And I actually gave him, okay, it's not letting me send it. I actually gave him one of my books, actually, and I don't think he read it. I think he threw it in the garbage, but I'll send a photo here in a second. I'll send a photo here in a second. He came to the university, and I gave it to him, and he told me, and I quote, "Don't read or don't believe everything you read in this book," which is a Austrian economics book for dummies, which basically talks about how if we don't get spending under control, it becomes a problem for the individuals.
Michael, first off, thank you for taking the time to come onto my show.
Problem, man. Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. Really.
Thank you. I've got to be honest here. I've never interviewed a libertarian before. I mean, I've talked to a lot of them, but I've never actually interviewed one on my show. But that's okay. I want people listening to this show tonight to have an authentic conversation. So I'm
going to answer the hard questions as well too.
Okay, I just want to disclose that the questions are going to be tough, but I promise you they will be fair. I'm not here to trip you up for sport. This is about hearing what you actually think and giving people something real to judge you on. So with that being said, let's get into it.
Sure. Like Dominic's not here trying to sabotage me or anything.
Yeah. All right, so let's start off with a little local color. Battle River Crowfoot is in the political spotlight right now, and not for the reasons anyone in town would have asked for. Pierre Poilievre, or Pension Poilievre as he's better known, is parachuting into your town that he has no ties to, in a province he hasn't set foot in for over 2 decades, for what many have called an unnecessary, costly by-election. He's not even living in your town and renting property. He can't even vote in your election, as he's been staying in a hotel in Edmonton paid for by the Conservative Party. And to top it all off, he had Garnet Genius bring a busload of fans from out of province to AstroTurf support at the July 29th candidate forum.
Yep.
From what you've seen, how are people in your town reacting? Are locals actually buying into this nonsense, or is there frustration at the, what I would say is blatant disrespect?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. The people that were at the debate actually themselves that weren't part of those busloads of people were actually very disappointed because of that. There's a lot of people locally in Camrose that wanted to attend that debate and hear the conversations from the other candidates, including myself. And because all the seats were booked within the first hour, the town, which has the most amount of people in this riding, was almost blindsided. The actual people living in the riding couldn't actually hear those concerns and had to go on CBC to be able to listen to it. And obviously most of the people in this riding wouldn't rather pick up the TV if they didn't have to, Most of the people door to door, it depends on who you're talking to. Obviously the conservative voters are obviously thrilled to have the leader of the opposition join in this riding, but literally anybody else that I talk to that isn't already a conservative definitely have some questions to ask. They want to know how much taxpayer dollars is going towards this election. There's people that don't already vote that already are thinking that this is a complete waste of time to be able to go to vote because of Pierre Poilievre running. There's obviously some people that are like, well, there's the girl in Saskatchewan that retired recently. Why didn't he take that seat instead of having to, kick out an already established MP? What kind of backroom deals was going on with Damien? We don't know what he was offered to be able to get him to reside. Was it just out of his own good faith? Or was there some cabinet position promised for him later down the line? Those are the
honestly,
concerns
I'm going to assume it was probably a Senate seat, but I'm not here to speculate on that, as that's not the topic tonight. But I do agree with you. Like, I know for a fact that if my MP did something like that, I would be outraged. And in my own case, I used to live in Durham, now Bowmanville, Oshawa North, and my current MP, Jamil Javani, at the time was a parachute candidate. I mean, he came in from out of town, and he didn't go to the initial debate back in 2024. Now, he did go to the one in 2025, so I'll give him credit there, but I actually tried to interview Jamil back in, back in 2024 about why he decided to run in a riding he has no ties to, but he, of course, didn't let me. But yeah, I agree. I think it's completely disgraceful. I mean, I think your town deserves better than someone who wants to treat them as disposable. I absolutely agree with you on that.
And one of the other concerns, one last quick thing, is that people are concerned that maybe they would want Pierre Poilievre to run this riding if he would stay. However, he has been on the case multiple times saying that come 2029, he will let Damien run again. So he is not in this for the long term. He doesn't want to actually stay in this riding
Yeah.
long term. He just wants to use it for his member of parliament seat and then dispose of us and leave us in 3 years, which has also got a lot of people concerned as well too.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's very clear from the way him and his wife have talked about this that, you know, assuming he actually does get elected in about a week or so, you know, the children of Battle River, they're not going to be going to school with Poilievre's kids. They're not going to know Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre has even, and Damien Kurek have been quite on the nose about the fact that this is just temporary and that Pierre Poilievre isn't even going to stay there. He's going to seek Carleton out in 2028. And honestly, if I was, as I said, to reiterate, if I was living in Battle River, I would feel outraged right now.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the people have the right to ask these tough questions, and Pierre Poilievre just isn't showing up. I mean, he hasn't showed up to the majority of the candidate forums, actually.
Two of
And
them.
when he, yeah, exactly. And when he is there, you know, to give a rare piece of credit to someone like Grant Abram, for example, he doesn't answer the questions, whether it be the constituents or other candidates. So yeah, in terms of candidates, you're actually one of the younger candidates I've seen running in an election. And, you know, I don't agree with everything you have to say, but regardless, I think Ottawa could use some fresh blood.
Yeah. I mean, most of the other candidates that are running are, I think the other candidate that was the youngest from me is probably Sarah, and I think she's in her later 40s. So I think someone
Yeah.
in their 20s running an election is definitely very unusual for this type of an election.
Oh, so we're in the same generation. You're in your 20s. I didn't know what your age was, but I
Yeah.
figured you were younger. So,
I-
as a fellow member of Gen Z,
Yeah.
what do you think young people like you and I actually want from politics right now? Do you think that Gen Z is looking for radical change, or do you think we're just looking for a seat at the table? And how do you actually keep young people engaged beyond just election day?
Well, this is a pretty long question to ask. I'm going to say if we as Gen Z or even the millennials before us don't get their act together, we're going to see a lot more Gen Zers asking for radical change because a lot of people are afraid that they're not going to have the same benefits that their forefathers had. They're not going to be able to buy a house. They're not going to be
Yeah.
able to keep up with investments. They're not going to be able to buy groceries and have a family. That's what they're worried about at the end of the day. And most people don't care about politics. They just want to be left the hell alone. So if,
Yeah.
if you want to keep people, on the centrist line, we got to keep fighting for the, regular everyday life, or else people will want a radical change. And we're seeing this quite a bit where most politicians are really ignoring the basic issues that are facing most of the youngsters in today's society. And most of the time, how we get people engaged in politics, like I'm a student at U of C. My main objective outside of politics is to engage and get people involved and informed in politics. I work with Students for Liberty. I'm the city director. And the main objective is that we go in and offer people free books and free education towards everything towards politics so people can make an informed decision. It may not necessarily be the libertarian decision, but at the end of the day, you need to know what is affecting you, what is affecting your family, what is affecting your community. Because if you do nothing, and that's what I'm afraid of my generation, not doing anything, is if you don't do anything, you sit on your hands, look at what these older politicians are going to do to you. This is what's going to happen in your future if you don't step up and actually do something. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be like me and run an election, but that can mean volunteering, helping out a food bank, helping out organize an event, or heck, run an election like I did. That's the extreme, but that's an option, and someone's got to do something.
I agree. I actually have some history in terms of getting politically involved myself. I mean, in Durham's by-election, I volunteered for the NDP candidate Chris Borgia. I almost ended up running in the 2025 provincial election, but I decided to wait till 2029 to do that. I voted in the Liberal leadership race. I've attended like Pride events, and I am the Toronto co-lead of the Canadian Future Party Youth. And this is kind of a thing about radicalization too, is when you have people who spend forever not listening to other people, you'll get these fringe people like Pierre Poilievre, like Maxime Bernier, and they'll sit there and say, listen, I hear you, and I'm going to listen to you, and then all critical thinking goes out the window. I saw that firsthand when I went to a Poilievre rally in Ryan Terminal, and realized that a big chunk of Gen Z that's on the right is very fringe, very radicalized, and it's primarily, in my view, because they feel like well, I mean, you've had a liberal government for going on 4 terms now, so yeah, they feel rejected, so they're looking for anything that isn't the current status quo. So yes, you're absolutely right.
It's basic populist theory. Like, they're using the opportunities and anger, like I said, that genuine anger that people have towards politics, and they're exploiting it for radicalization. That's what I'm saying. If we
Yeah,
don't fix the issues now, these populists will take advantage of that, and that's what we're going to see more and more in the next coming years here, up to 2029.
yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about a lot of those subjects tonight, so let's get into some things you've said and your general pitch to voters.
Sure.
You have said repeatedly on your website and at candidate forums and at candidate forums that you would reject any form of MP salary or pension.
Yes.
Now, that's a bold choice. A choice I respect nonetheless, as you should know, but, especially in a business where the perks seem to be half the reason anyone runs in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I'm just curious. Is your rejection of the political aristocracy about principle? Is it about optics? Or are you just looking to set a new standard?
Well, I think it's all of the above. I think it's absolutely immoral that our politicians are getting paid almost 3 to 4 times more than the average Canadian. I think a good system would be that politicians and bureaucrats or anybody getting paid in the public sector should get paid the annual median income of an average Canadian. That way they understand what it's like to be in that position, because I think the average wage of a Canadian is anywhere between 40 to 70,000 depending on your province. But yet, the starting wages is almost $250,000 depending on which party salary, position, if you're in cabinet, all of that type of stuff. And my opinion, it's a complete waste of our tax dollars.
It is a waste of our tax dollars.
I think it's completely immoral. I don't think that every politician should have zero, because then probably it would disenfranchise a lot of the lower class people from wanting to run, which is not what I'm wanting to do. I don't want this politics to be an elitist system. But I'm wanting to do this because I've already myself put thousands of hours into advocacy, whether it be organizing protests, working with Students for Liberty, working with the Taxpayer Federation, and I haven't seen a cent from that. And to think that I deserve any more now if I became an MP or actually working for my own people and my constituency here, it's no different in my opinion. It's just more responsibility, and I'm willing to take on that responsibility, even if that means having to eat out of a food bank or sleep in my car. I don't care. I do it already. I'll do it again.
Yeah. This is one area that we actually agree on quite a bit, because I've been very vocal in terms of my writing and shit, that I personally believe that the idea that, to look at the leader, not the leader of the opposition anymore, but to look at someone like Pierre Poilievre, in 2024, he spent $8 million worth of taxpayer dollars on essentially vanity expenses, and to top that all off, he gets to live in a taxpayer funded mansion. And I not to single him out, I just single him out because despite being the leader of the fiscal austerity party, he spends more money than the prime minister and the leader of the next party, the NDP, combined. But ultimately speaking, regardless of who it is, left, right, center, I think that this idea, this colonial relic that states that members of parliament require taxpayer-funded luxury to do their jobs, is completely ludicrous. I wouldn't sit there and say that politicians should make minimum wage, but, at the same time, if members of parliament were making minimum wage, then you know what? Maybe they wouldn't advocate for minimum wage to be a wage where you cannot afford to live. That's what leads to a lot of, parliamentarians being so out of touch. It's the fact that, they, in a lot of cases, you have a lot of talentless MPs who've, they've never worked a real job a day in their life. They've never gotten a bill passed, and they only get reelected because they're a part of the party that riding would vote for. In some ridings, they're going to vote for the conservative candidate or the liberal candidate. It could be, they could run a mailbox and they'd vote for the mailbox. So, yeah.
And don't get me started on the damn pension as well, too. Most Canadians get, $112,000 as their annual pension if they turn 65. And these politicians are getting what? Jagmeet Singh recently retired. He's getting a $2.3 million pension, which is I mean, like I said, it doesn't matter what party you're looking at, conservative,
Yeah,
liberal, New Democrat, they shouldn't be getting a $2.3 million pension. I'm sorry for the
I
work that they're
yeah, I agree.
doing.
And Pierre Poilievre is getting what was it? I think it's around the ballpark of 8 to 9 million, but don't quote me on that. I'm just going off memory. And before Mark Carney came along, Pierre Poilievre was actually the richest politician in Canada, and he made all of his money off of, you know, being a corrupt politician. That's how he got his money,
And,
cutting deals with people he should not be.
and he became an MP around my age, I believe. So that
He
also
did.
helped as well too, because he's been collecting paychecks since he was in his 20s.
And he's qualified for his multi-million-dollar pension since he was in his 30s. You know, a lot of, if you get to people who are in the ages of 40 or 50, they'll consider someone who's in their early 30s to be a kid still. So parliamentarians across the board get to qualify for luxuries that you and I, unless we actually do the hard work, will never get to see. I mean, Stornoway alone is a bigger house than either of us have probably ever set foot in, probably. So, yeah, I agree. Again, I agree with you. That's probably the one thing we agree on the most is we need to end the political aristocracy. We need to, for so many better things our tax dollars could be going towards, and maybe a hot take, but I do not think we should be housing any politicians when we still have Canadian citizens who are homeless, when we still have people who, they're cutting up their pills because they can't afford rent. Honestly, if we have so little money that we cannot house like regular people, then we don't have money to be housing Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney or any of them. But that's just my opinion on the matter.
Yeah.
Right?
You won't see any
All right.
disagreements from me, man.
Yeah. Respect. All right, now let's get on to your platform, the things you're proposing to the voters of your town. So let's start off with supply management.
Yes. One of my biggest policies.
Yes. So your platform has a big focus on ending supply management. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Canada has supply management, dairy, poultry, beef. Now, I actually spoke to some farmers before getting on this call, and what they told me is personally they liked it because it gives them stability and the ability to plan ahead, which in a lot of industries is rare. Being a farmer is ultimately entrepreneurial, and, like many candidates in this by-election, you've committed to repealing it.
Yeah.
I just want to ask, what is your basis for wanting to repeal supply management? Why do you want to do that? Walk us through that.
Well, it's a centralized economic policy. You're obviously going to get those that are going to benefit from the system, predominantly those that are, already have massive amounts of land, those that are already rich. As I always like to say, it's like the dairy cartel. If you own thousands of acres of land and have paid millions and millions of dollars into the quota system, yeah, you've got nothing to lose because food prices are going to be so damn high, you're going to be making more money than you could ever wish for. But if you talk to literally any other farmer, like if you talk to people that are maybe only bringing a couple $1,000s in profit every single year, those that are on the poverty line, those that only own a couple of acres of land, well, they're trying to compete with this cartel that own all these thousands of acres of land. And the only way they could compete is by selling their crops for cheaper. But they can't because they can't sell it for cheaper because they're limited on the amount of milk they can produce every single year, which creates an artificial scarcity, which means that prices have to remain expensive, which not only hurts those that want to compete against bigger businesses, but it also hurts the consumers because that means, well, if I want a massive amount of surplus of milk to drive down the cost, because for God's sakes, guys, I go to the store, it's almost $12 for a liter nowadays, which is ridiculous in my opinion, then I want that to be cheaper. And I can't because the government is saying that we can't make it cheaper because we have this policy. Like I said, there's obviously some in a centralized economy that are going to benefit. But we don't believe in centralized economy as libertarians. We believe in a free market society. And if we want free competition and we want cheaper goods, the only way we can do that is by letting the smaller businesses compete by producing more than the bigger businesses.
Okay. I will agree with you that, like every system, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Everything will have problems if you look hard enough. I will agree that supply management is not a perfect system. So I'm not going to say that it doesn't have its problems. since you're actually in a rural farming community, this is actually a good question to ask you in particular. Have you personally spoken directly to farmers about how supply management negatively affects them? Or is this more so an on paper, I support the free market absolutely thing?
I think that Jonathan Bridges, my PPC candidate or opponent, has definitely done as you just described, where it is definitely just his party platform. I've not seen him gone to talk to farmers. However, there's a lot in my town of Drumheller and the town's predominantly like Three Hills and Carbon, where it's all agricultural workers. There's nobody else other than agricultural workers that live there. They are people that don't own hundreds of acres of land. I've talked to a lot of farmers that only own maybe about 20. I think the max I heard was about 50 for some of these guys, which is mostly for cattle. And every single one of them has said that they're struggling because of it. I've met some people where they own farms that are almost 150 years old, about when the country was first founded, around when Alberta was first founded as a province. When that's how long they've owned these lands. And they're telling me that they're on the verge of bankruptcy because they can't compete with the Quebec's cartel farmers. So if we don't repeal this system, I've talked to probably about at least 70 farmers that could confirm that if it's not repealed within the next decade, they will go bankrupt and they will have to sell their land. Now, that is a problem for me because at the end of the day, obviously money is money. Businesses are going to run. Farmers are going to keep going regardless. But we have historical people, that aren't going to be able to farm on their land. We're going to lose that land and we're going to have less people producing food in my riding, which is a big problem. Less jobs, less food, and overall, I mean, God knows what they're going to do with that land after they sell it. I don't want to see more suburbs out here.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Suburbs, well, simply put, we don't need suburbs that are, cutting through our farming communities. And I can tell that you feel very personally about this. I feel sorry for the people that that are at risk of going bankrupt. So all the best to them.
This happened to my family as well too. That's why it's a little bit also personal. Like my family, we're based in two cities, one in British Columbia in Comox, and one here in Drumheller. And there were a half farm in Dahlia, which is next to Drumheller. And the problem is that we were forced to sell our land. Maybe we would have sold it after my grandparents died, but who knows? The problem was that the government on all levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, imposed so many restrictions because they wanted people near the cities to sell their land to build suburbs in the first place, so they could build, they could continue to build suburbs. So they limited who you could sell to. You couldn't sell it to a supermarket anymore. You couldn't sell it internationally because of tariffs. You couldn't sell it to, interprovincially. You had to sell it in a farmer's market, or you had to sell it on the street. And then they put restrictions on that. Then they subsidized big farmers. The provinces came in and said, oh my God, all these agricultural workers that are suffering, let's give money. But if you don't own more than 100 acres, you don't get federal subsidies or provincial subsidies. And then obviously supply management has existed for, about 50 odd years here, which has been hurting the smaller farmers for almost half a century. And all of that encompassed to my family losing both of our ranches, which has sucked because we're probably the first, like me and my family are probably the first generation of my family to actually live in the city and not be out in the fields, which is crazy. So to me, it is personal, and I'm seeing it happen to hundreds of other people in this riding, and that's why it's personal. Yeah, it is.
I'm sorry that you and your family lost your farm, by the way. That really sucks, man. I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, we're working to hopefully get it back by the time I'm on my parents' age, but we'll see what we can do.
And I hope you do.
Like I said, if people want to sell their land willingly because a new generation of kids come on, they don't want to work on the land anymore, then that's fair. That's a fair deal. But the fact is most of these people are being forced off their land because they have no other choice. And these are people that have lived on that land probably their whole life. And that's why it's personal to me. That's why I say supply management is my biggest policy. And I will put a bill on the House floor, remove it day one if I'm elected.
So, supply management is to you what direct democracy is to me, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something I agree with you on. For the broad part, I do believe that if supply management is to remain a thing, it needs to be reformed so that way it doesn't hurt small family farms and doesn't only seek to benefit, your large corporate farmers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I believe that is an issue, and I could understand why, you among people in your town have issues with that. But beyond stuff like that, there's a huge reason a lot of Canadians like supply management. Now, I'm sure you're going to have heard about this because of the political climate of today. And that is that it keeps U.S. dairy and beef out of our market. You know, their milk tastes off, their beef is loaded with hormones we do not allow our farmers to put in their beef. And simply put, when the President of the United States talks about how he wants Mark Carney to get rid of supply management, there's not a single Canadian I've met who's exactly clamoring for that. So if you were to be an MP and that day one bill you made were to hypothetically pass, what would be your plan to stop lower quality imports from flooding Canadian shelves?
Well, like I said, it depends. I'll try to answer this in the trade and domestic production, so this might be a longer question. But first and foremost, if we do open up trade to allow American farmers to start importing stuff here, which honestly, usually it's the opposite way around, but if they do, most Canadians are smart enough as individuals to be able to pick what they want and buy what they want in their grocery stores. And most people, as we've seen, especially with steroid or processed food, more than 75% of average Canadians prefer natural or grass-fed beef compared to. Because of that, most Canadian consumers are already going to be seeking out the higher quality food in the first place, which Canadian farmers are good at. And number two, why repealing supply management would be good for trade relations in the first place is because of that supply management, well, Trump wants to be able to put more tariffs on our dairy industries and all of our exports to the United States. A lot of farmers here in Alberta also want to be able to sell to the States because it's a massive market. They're almost nearing almost 400 million people that live in the United States now. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of food to be able to sell. And if they can compete in a domestic market against Quebec and against Ontario, they want to be able to sell it to the States. So if we remove supply management, it also opens an opportunity for free trade that allows our Western farmers to sell to Montana, Idaho, Washington, all of those states to also generate more money. So it goes both ways. It also allows us to flood their markets with cheaper goods because we can now outproduce the United States now because we get rid of supply management. So it can go both ways. Like I said, I understand why Eastern farmers would be more scared because they have the most to lose. But I'm not here running for a Quebec seat. I don't care about the big monopolized cartel farmers in Montreal. I care about the small 50-acre land farmers here in Battle River Crowfoot, and they are the ones that are suffering from supply management, and that's the ones that I'm here to fight for.
Yeah. And you know what? Fair enough. I absolutely would not say that you're in the wrong for that because, you got to make sure your community comes first, and that's what you're running for. You don't need to worry about Quebec until you get into Parliament, but, that's a tomorrow issue. Today's issue, as you are a candidate in Battle River Crowfoot and not in Quebec, is to get Quebec, or sorry, not Quebec, sorry. It's to represent the people of Battle River. So I understand where you're coming from on that. And yes, Canadians do seek out fresher food. My grandmother, for example, she goes out of her way to not buy like beef and other products. Where she can, she will always buy the Canadian option first, even if it's more expensive. So, yeah, you are right about that. Canadians, they will seek out the better option. Maybe they will. I don't know. Free markets. You're a libertarian. You support free markets. Yeah. How broadly do you think deregulation should happen?
Well, generally, in my opinion, regulation should be kept towards making sure goods and services are safe for the general population and for workers to make sure that they're not, running in a Chinese steel mill where they're going to lose their arms. I think that's generally where I believe regulation should stop. The problem is most of our regulation in this country also affects whether or not you can get a good permit. How long it's going to take you to get a permit. And like I said, supply management, I consider that regulation. There's a lot of different variants of supply management which limits. If you have a product, you have to go with a specific brand. You can't franchise. How much you're allowed to produce in a year. If you want to put it on store shelves, what supplier and supply chain do you have to work with? And if you don't work with those people, you can't actually see your product on the shelves. That's the type of regulation that I'm against, which is hurting both the consumers that want variety of goods, but it's also hurting the smaller or up-and-coming businesses that want to be able to compete because it's only those that can take advantage or lobby the government to get looser restrictions on certain businesses. Yep. Those are the ones that are benefiting. And that's why so many people have problems with
Yeah.
elitist companies is because they lobby the government and get those advantages when it should be free to everyone to take advantage of our capitalist system.
Yeah. I believe personally that one of the things we got to do in politics, both on the provincial and federal level, is we need to get the lobbyists out of, Parliament. We got to get the lobbyists out of our politics so that way the people, who we elect to represent us, that they're representing us. Yes, I do. I'm just saying that to just kind of highlight the fact that I agree with you that lobbying is a big problem. But the reason I ask you about how far you would want deregulation to be taken is because, from a broad perspective, deregulation and free trade in some cases, but more so in this case, deregulation, has a track record of job losses, wage stagnation, and more hazards for workers and consumers. Yeah. And companies, broadly speaking, aren't charities. They put profit first, regardless of how big it is, because that's how capitalism works. So how do you make sure that deregulation doesn't just leave Canadians poorer, less safe, and at the mercy of corporate greed?
See, this is probably my more controversial opinion. This is probably going to knock me down a few pegs as a libertarian, but I believe this also goes the same way as deregulation is for the workers as well too, because right now there's a lot of regulations on unions and those that want to be able to advocate for better rights. And the same way that companies are also are regulated and told to sit down and shut up, so are workers. There's a lot of bills and restrictions on workers for being able to fight for better rights. And I do believe that if workers band together, they do deserve those rights. Right now, as an example, they are not allowed to wildcat strike. They're not allowed to be able to organize a second union if the company forms a union. Well, if that is already a pre-existing union, well, they can't create a new one. That's actually illegal. They'll go to jail if they try to set up another one. But the problem, there's also restrictions on workers being able to advocate for themselves, because they're told that this is what you're given, and if you don't like it, well, there's no other avenues of change. So at the same time, you can have businesses that can take advantage of deregulation, as well as workers being able to deregulate and have the ability to further fight for their own rights and for better wages. So it works, in my opinion, hand in hand with each other.
Yeah, I could understand where you're coming from on that. I think union workers are disrespected, broadly speaking, which sucks because union workers are the backbone of this nation. I mean, I come from a union family myself, and little known fact that I'll reveal for the audience today while we're here, my first major political moment in my life was when I was in grade 7. There was like a GM plant in my town, and one of the teachers was giving a lesson, and he actually sat there and said that it was a good thing that this plant was shutting down, because he basically claimed that every single person who worked at a GM plant was just a lazy bum who didn't go to college. And, again, come from a union family. A lot of my family worked at that place, so I just kind of stood up out of my chair and I told him that he was fucking wrong. I actually agree with your stance on, like, unions being allowed to expand. Anything that gives the worker...
Well, let me tell you a story from my life. Have you ever heard of CLAC before, or the Christian Labor Association of Canada? Any worker that has ever worked in transportation or steel or any of that type of stuff that has heard of CLAC will agree with me on this. They're probably the worst union in all of Canada, and that's because they're a union, like I said, that is controlled by the corporation. And because the government doesn't allow us to actually wildcat strike or form a secondary union, we either have to stay with a controlled opposition union, or then we're stuck and we lose it. We take.
Yeah. Oh, he's gone. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I'm almost being summoned to go back on the campaign trail. I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's okay. What were you saying?
No, I was just saying, like, that's a prime example of it right there. Like I said, any person that has ever worked in transportation or worked in steel will tell you that CLAC is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because it is a controlled opposition union that stops workers from actually being able to push forward their rights. And they're told that if they try to seek out any other avenue other than joining the one controlled union, well, you're out of luck. And that's exactly my problem. Like I said, regulation both affects businesses as well as workers. And that sucks as someone who is like myself, a young person wanting to get in the steel mill to be able to make some money to be able to go to university. We were stuck on that. And now that's a big problem. And I know a lot of people across this country are facing that same damn issue.
All right, I want to pivot to another thing you've talked about in your platform. You've talked a lot about Alberta, the province you live in, needing more autonomy.
Yes.
I want to ask this in good faith. Beyond the broad idea of we should be more like our own country, what actual powers do you personally think the province and the people of the province is missing? What is Ottawa, in your opinion, forcing on Alberta that's such a problem, and how would you change that in practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a dream scenario of what I want for Alberta, and there's obviously what I can actually do as just a single MP. I understand my restrictions, but if I talk to any single person in this riding, doesn't matter if they're Conservative, Liberal, New Democrat, they believe that Alberta is getting an unfair deal in Confederation. At bare minimum, they want to see a small change. There's some people who want radical change. There's some people who just want a smaller change, but they want a fairer deal. Now, how this is going about is a lot of people feel that the control of basic or major services are not in their own hands, but are in the hands of either Edmonton or Ottawa, and they want local control. And so I say provincial control because obviously I want it away from the federal government, but really I'm also a localist. I believe it needs to go even farther down from provincial. I think it needs to go to the complete local level. And the problem is that we do have a federal government that takes advantage of our province, steals money, whether it be equalization, controls us through supply and management, but also provincially, we have another province out east called Quebec that gets favorable deals that allows them to sponsor lobbyists to support the federal government that benefits them while also hurting us. Well, we don't get those same advantages. At the bare minimum, a dream scenario that I want to advocate for, if I ever got the opportunity to be in Parliament, is to push Alberta to be like Quebec. I think that's a very, very good middle ground. Because if you don't, the very bare minimum, there's all these people that believe we're getting an unfair deal. And you see what's happening here is that we don't see politicians advocating for a stronger, more important Alberta. And we're seeing all these people wanting to push for separation. And it's even worse is that all these politicians are also telling them that their feelings are unheard and they're not allowed to have self-determination, which is radicalizing those independence people. So we have a double-edged sword now that we're pushing more people to independence and making them more radical at the same damn time.
Yeah. I'm going to touch on separatism in a minute, but just to elaborate, I'm all in favor of giving more power to the municipal level, and as a part of the way I think things should be governed, I think that the decisions that governments make should be decided via direct municipal councils that get the right to audit their MPs and MPPs. Stuff like meeting lunch, that becomes $86 at Bistro 36 where we discussed transit. I'm all in favor of returning power to the people. Absolutely. But just to elaborate, just to hone in on what you're talking about, what specifically are working class Albertans and the province in general, what exactly is Alberta missing that Quebec has? Is there any specific things, or is it just the fact that they don't have what Quebec has? Both are valid. I'm just curious, just want to understand where you're coming from here, and how do you actually go about giving that back, broadly speaking, without it just becoming another slogan, another axe the tax kind of thing?
Like I said, there are two major... I could talk about the hundreds of things that people believe that they're being misinterpreted or misallocated here in Alberta. Anything from a local issue, they get grants to repair their roads that are being offered by the federal government. That money never shows up, to anything to the two big ones, which are obviously equalization. They don't believe that we're getting a fair deal, or our money is being taken from us, being sent out east. We don't get to see a cent of that. And number two, a lot of people obviously worried about immigration. They do believe that we should have immigration, though the big amount that's being brought in by the Liberals is not sustainable for the province of Alberta. And they believe that if the province or cities or property owners were allowed to control immigration, that they could manage it at more sustainable levels.
Yeah.
So there's those two big things that people are wanting to see. And like you said, how do I change that? Well, I've already kind of admitted that it's kind of going to be hard for one MP to be able to do it because, I mean, we saw how Brian Mulroney did it and how that ended up. But the problem is that no.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I'm just asking how you see things. I'm just asking how you see things
yeah.
ideally. You know, I'm not gonna hold you to the fire if one MP can't do it. I'm just, because I'm giving you the chance to tell people how you think it should be done. So the answers can be idealistic. I'm just curious as to how you think it should be handled broadly, not just what can be done in the scope of one person.
Like I said, general like taxation, immigration, equalization, that should be controlled by the province of Alberta, bare minimum. And number two, I think the only way that I as a lone MP would be able to tackle that issue, I favor here. A lot of politicians are held to a party whip, and they're told to not change their ideas if the central party tells them otherwise. Well, I'm not held by a party whip. In fact, our party is actually quite against party whips that we allow our representatives and those that are running to make their own platform points. So if I want to go up to the House of Commons and start talking about Albertan sovereignty, I can hold every other Albertan MP to account on them not actually supporting Alberta, which could hurt their re-election chances. So it's a whole lot of political power that allows me to basically, like I said, peer pressure Albertan politicians to actually get shit done.
Yeah. Fair enough. Before I touch on separatism more broadly, as a politician from Alberta, do you think any of the blame in the situation with Alberta, because there's a lot of issues with Alberta right now, economically and such, people are divided. I'm curious, do you think any of the blame for this is on the provincial government for basic things like not diversifying their economy, and in the case of someone like Danielle Smith, would you say that Danielle Smith is contributing to the divide in Alberta right now?
I would generally agree. So I would agree. I would say, like I said, I'm a libertarian. I ain't gonna be out here defending any government or any politician. Daniel Smith has obviously failed
Yeah.
quite a bit on education and healthcare. I will say that. I've gone to I've had my family having to go to the hospital, I had my girlfriend having to be able to go to the hospital, and the fact that we have to wait almost 9-10 hours just to see a doctor is absolutely ridiculous. No province in Canada should have to wait that long
I agree.
just to see a damn doctor, in my opinion. And as a student that goes through the University of Calgary and I'm having to see our academia and education system, yeah, it's also whacked up. I see a lot of corruption within our school boards, where money is being handed from our provincial government to these school boards, and they eat it up in bonuses every single year, where these governors, which are supposed to be getting paid only $100,000 every year, somehow managing Rolls-Royce cars and getting a $2 million salary every single year. Well, we don't have Wi-Fi in our school, we're not increasing our seat count every single year, we're not increasing or actually advancing our programs at all. So yeah, 100%. There is
Yeah.
major failures on the levels of our country as well too.
Yeah. That's just the political aristocracy in practice. When it comes to the kids of schools across the country, in Alberta's case, when it comes to the kids needing actual resources, does Alberta have IEPs, Michael?
Sorry, you're gonna have to repeat that.
Do schools in Alberta have IEPs the way Ontario
I'm not
does?
familiar with IEPs. Could you explain what those are?
It's called an individual education plan, and basically, if you have a learning disability and you need certain resources from the school, that's what that is. Does Alberta have an equivalent to
No. Well, I don't like flaunting this around, but I am autistic. I am someone who's been diagnosed, and let me tell you, there is no support system for us. I definitely don't like to push it. I obviously don't want to take advantage of that. However, I see a lot of people that are worse off than me, and they don't get those support systems. They don't get aids from our school system. They don't get support from the government. So no, we don't have that here in Alberta.
Yeah. I can actually relate to that, despite being from Ontario. When I was a kid, I needed help doing everything. There was a lot of things I couldn't do. Like, I couldn't write properly till I was 12. Even now, it looks like shit, and it hurts my wrist after a couple minutes. because of the fact that teachers did not want to help me in school, I could barely do multiplication by the time grade 4 came around, but then they threw a piece of division paper at me, and like I cannot do division whatsoever. And there was one time, very specific time, that's always stuck with me. One time a kid just saw me staring at the paper and told the teacher that it looked like I needed help, and she said that she was not going to help me because I did not ask for help directly. Where the thing is, when I was a kid, I found a lot of things to be quite I found asking for help to be embarrassing when I was like 9, and a part of the reason why I couldn't figure out how to write properly was because I did have like a motor skills aide that would come in once every other week, and she would actually go out of her way to make fun of me for not being able to write properly. So I can full well relate to the fact that children are not getting, broadly across the country, aren't getting the help they need. And I feel bad for Albertans because, for Danielle Smith, when kids like us needed help, we can't do that. There's not enough money there. But, the second her and her buddies need bonuses, the second that she wants to discriminate against some students, all in the aim of political optics. Oh, suddenly there's more than enough money for that. That's why, ultimately speaking, the political aristocracy is the enemy of the people. Regardless of what party you're a part of, the political aristocracy is the enemy. Like, there's no question about it. It's made this country worse, and I think that, guys like us should be ultimately trying to shape the conversation in a nonpartisan manner so that way we can get rid of the political aristocracy. And
it's an issue that's not just with,
I think
it's an issue that's not even just the United Conservatives that are at fault here as well too. If they were removed and Danielle Smith wasn't our premier anymore, Nenshi, who is the leader of the official opposition here in Alberta, he was the mayor of Calgary for quite some time, and he suffered from that same issue where, big projects, big ideas, but it seems like a lot of money was set aside for the contractors that got all these bigger bonuses. The city education system got abandoned. All the Catholic schools got shut down because, well, all the bonus money and all the money that was supposed to be going to education went into bonuses for the principals or for the board of governors. So the same issue is going to apply whether or not Danielle Smith is going to be premier or not, because you have two parties that are doing exactly the same damn thing.
Yeah. Now, it's worth noting, I don't know a lot about Naheed Nenshi.
I believe so. Don't quote me on that.
I just want to make sure, so I'm sorry, to the audience who's watching this, I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name, but I don't know a lot about Naheed Nenshi. I know he's, from what I've heard, a bit similar to the Ontario NDP, and, even when I was an NDP supporter, I fucking hate the Ontario NDP. Their support of applied behavioral analysis therapy, which, is basically like conversion therapy, but on autistic children, like, that's a non-starter for me. I wouldn't have even voted for the Ontario NDP in 2025 if I did not personally know the candidate in my, riding. Even when I was an NDP supporter, broadly speaking, I did not like the provincial NDPs, from British Columbia to, for the longest time, Ontario and Alberta. Like, the provincial NDPs have this issue where they're run by lobbyists and they're run by political opportunists, and when you have your Danielle Smith and your Naheed Nenshi, who functionally are exactly the same in that regard, it leads to ideas like separatism getting broad, it leads to separatism gaining in the conversation. Now, as for separatism in this election, some of the candidates in your riding, like Jonathan Bridges, the PPC candidate, and especially United Party leader Grant Abram, they have openly declared their support for Alberta separation. Now, I just want to ask, do you personally support Alberta separation? Like, would you support a Republic of Alberta?
I support any people's rights to self-determination. I'm not here out saying that we need to have an independent Alberta, nor am I out here saying that we need to stay in Canada. I believe, and this has been the party policy of the Libertarian Party since 1973, is that we support self-determination for all peoples across the world. And so at the end of the day, I believe Canada and subsequently Alberta deserve a referendum on Albertan independence. If the idea and decision of the people is yes, we overwhelmingly want to stay in Canada, then that should be the decision of the people, not being told at gunpoint that no, you have to stay in Canada. It's not like we live in a confederation or anything. So I do believe we need to have a referendum. You'll find no one else on this in this country and in this province that supports a referendum more than I do. But I don't support it because I believe Alberta needs to be independent or because we need to stay. It should, as I always believe, it's up to the decision of the individuals. Now, personally, I believe that I don't like the federal government, and I'd rather the federal government not exist anyway. So if you try to tell me, there's a way for us to not have the federal government anymore, then that's a very enticing offer to me. But the problem is that we have to do that again with the provincial government because I don't want a Republic of Alberta. I want to keep going until we get, like I said, down to the local level. So maybe we need to have a subsequent
Yeah.
election on whether or not we want to separate from Alberta. Who knows?
I'm going to correct you on something, Michael. You're wrong, because if there's anyone who supports referendums, period, in Canada the most, it would be me, not you, just saying. So I'm not saying you don't support it. It's just if there's anyone here in this call who supports referendums the most, it's going to be the guy who supports direct democracy and citizens.
I guess let me rephrase. I think I didn't mean just referendums in general. I think I just meant you'll never find someone that supports a referendum on Alberta independence more than me because I believe it's warranted. I believe it's completely fair for the people that have that decision.
Yeah. Now, personally, in terms of whether I support Alberta independence blanketly, I don't quite know, and I'll get to that in literally a second. But ultimately speaking, if there is consensus, I support Alberta's right to consider, so long as they're giving the Indigenous people a seat at the table, as they are required to by the Constitution of Canada, the Charter, so long as they're giving all Albertans a seat at the table. If every single person in Alberta wants to leave and form their own republic, I absolutely support that idea. And, I even think Canada itself, like the entire country, I think we should become a republic and leave the Commonwealth because, personally, maybe a hot take, I do not believe we have gained anything material from the Commonwealth, and I don't believe we gain anything material from having His Majesty, the King of Canada, as our head of state. Personally, I think we should do what Italy does, where the Prime Minister of Italy is the one who makes the decisions, but they have a president who basically just does the ceremonial stuff the way King Charles does. I don't think we have any material gain from having Charles, a foreign monarch be our head of state. And you know what? Republicanism, up until Trump came along in 2025, that was a popular idea in Canada. I mean, with the NDP, you had, I think, 2 leaders in a row who supported the idea of secession. I know that Jagmeet Singh did. I don't quite remember if Thomas Mulcair did. I'm just saying I think 2 leaders supported that. So I support republicanism for Canada.
You're going to hear the same from me. I know a lot of my fellow libertarians would disagree because there's surprisingly, in the feds at least, there's quite a lot of monarchists. But I believe, at bare minimum, the governor general position is destroying the Canadian heritage that we have here with our monarchy.
Yeah.
So I think it should go in one of 2 ways. Either, number one, we need to abolish the general governor position and establish, like you were saying, a parliamentary republic, quite like the French system, or I didn't even know Italians had a parliamentary republic, but yeah, something like that, where we have a president. However, I'd also be okay if the king instead took the governor general position and forced him to actually come to our country every single year. I think that could also work as well too, because at least at bare minimum, if we're keeping him as a cultural symbol, he should remain as that cultural symbol and not just be the cultural symbol from, across the Atlantic. So either it should be the Kingdom of Canada or the Commonwealth Republic of Canada, something along those lines. I'd be okay with either or.
Honestly, I think either would be better than what we got now. But personally, the only thing I want to see is a Commonwealth Republic, because, like I said, if we proposed having a position of leadership in Canada where the leadership decided is not from merit or idea, but it's from being born into a family in another country. Like, if we proposed a royal family in America, France, or anywhere else, most Canadians would say that that's fucking stupid and they wouldn't be in favor of it. So that's why I'm not in favor of it here. I think we should have a president. And I have no issue with King Charles, coming to visit, getting in his fancy pants and coming to visit Canada. But ultimately speaking, I do not think his pen should be the one signing our laws. I do not believe he should have the power to impeach our elected officials. I believe the only people who should have that decision to be made is the Canadian people. And a big issue that makes it hard for me to support Alberta independence as a broad concept is because, well, from what I see online, a lot of people that I see online who are talking about it are fringe voices on X, stereotyping Eastern Canada, wanting independence out of spite, and if you were to go pull their IP, they're not even in Canada. They're in France, not France. They're in America, Bangladesh, Russia, all of these different places that are outside of Canada. So the reason I bring that up is, from your perspective, on the ground, is separatism an organic movement in Alberta, or is it just a loud online?
Well, we have an organization called the Alberta Prosperity Project, which has been around, I think, for at least the last 5 years, which has been trying to push Alberta separation even before it was popular. And their main objective as of late has been to create town halls, host massive protest events where they bring those Canadians together. And I've been to quite a bit here in this riding just to talk with people and their consensus. And there's quite a few people that show up to these events. And generally, I would say it's more popular in the rural areas of Alberta than it is in the city. City, I guess most people are just uneducated. They just don't have an opinion either or. But in the rural areas that I've been to, especially more out east, like near Saskatchewan, part of this riding that you go, the more in favor of separation you'll find, especially rural farmers. Most people are so sick and tired of supply management. They want independence just to get rid of supply management. That's how brutal it is for some of these people. So if you're asking me just from the Battle River Crowfoot angle, 100%. There's definitely more support for independence, at least from the couple thousand people that I've talked to. Now, whether or not there's massive support for this in Edmonton is a complete other question, because I have absolutely no idea. And if I were probably to guess, it probably not, because Edmonton probably has a lot to gain by being part of Confederation. So.
Well, you don't even have to speak on behalf of Edmonton. I mean, I was asking you and you answered the question, so lucky for you. So I don't have to press you on you not answering my question. So, you get a hero cookie for that. One thing that a lot of Albertans want, whether they just want more autonomy or they want full independence, one of the things that they want is energy dependence. What are your stance on energy? Or sorry, what is your stance on, like, energy and, like, Alberta's economy? Why don't you walk us through that?
Well, despite our province being probably one of the greatest producers of energy in Canada, besides, I don't know if you want to rule, or if you want to fight Quebec on whether or not they're producing more megawatts per hour, but generally, we actually struggle to power our province every single year and actually heat our own province for some reason. I've unfortunately been subject to a lot of rolling blackouts where they do grids, where it's, they turn off certain sections of your province for power for 15 or 30 minutes so to allow the other half to gain more power. That's happened quite a bit here, and you'd think that there'd be more. And I think the problem with that is that there's quite a lot of rules and regulations on what can be constituted as electricity, what can be used to power or heat your homes, and general restrictions on, obviously refining gasoline here. So there's problems with, when Rachel Notley was the premier, they shut down all the coal power plants. So everything had to be replaced by oil because of that, which is, whether or not you agree if that's better, is up to interpretation. They had to change all the generators out and make them diesel power. Then, on the other half, the government bans the prospect of nuclear energy. So we have quite a lot of uranium here in Alberta and Saskatchewan, really? And yet, at the same time, it's a national issue. The province and the city here in Alberta don't have the legal right to start using that uranium. So we're completely stuck using oil. And the problem is, obviously, oil is cheaper coming from Louisiana than it is coming from the oil sands. And so everyone has been completely reliant on buying oil from the States. And with the tariffs coming in, we're going to have to deal with a major issue here, because we don't have the infrastructure to be able to heat and power everyone's homes. So what do we need? I think we need to loosen the restrictions on both oil and nuclear energy so we can survive this winter and we're not having to deal with more and more rolling blackouts.
100%. I actually didn't know about the uranium restriction. I actually didn't.
That's a very big issue, because I mean, you can probably see my name here on Discord. I'm a very big proponent of thorium nuclear energy. And I believe that, like I said, we should have more nuclear power here. In Canada, we own more than 13% of the world's reserves in thorium, plutonium, and thorium. So why don't we take advantage of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main issue with a lot of Alberta conservatives is, they want long-term energy dependence, but they want to double down on an industry that is in decline. I mean, the thing about fossil fuels is they're finite. Although they replenish, it takes millions of years to replenish, and we are using fossil fuels at a rate that is not sustainable. I think economically and environmentally, it makes more sense to invest in renewable and modern energy. So both Alberta and Canada is not left behind. I don't think we should be clinging to the old model. I think we should embrace nuclear energy and in some cases fusion. And that's why I can't get behind parties like the Green Party, is because like I support nuclear energy. I think it's the most clean form of energy we got until we make until we can crack the code on fusion energy. So
Here's my
the fact that they're against nuclear energy, I just can't get behind.
Here's my problem with renewable energy. Okay, I lived in British Columbia for a bit because, like I said, my family part lived in Comox as well too, and they have the advantage of having a lot of rivers. So all BC Hydro pretty much dominates the electricity industry in British Columbia. But the problem is, there's a lot of controversy around those type of renewable energies because, like I said, you have BC Hydro, or those that produce hydroelectric electricity through dams. Well, that's going to damage the rivers. You're going to have a lot of problems where it's on indigenous lands. You have to talk with indigenous groups. You have the problems where there's a lot of nature and a lot of wildlife that use these rivers that obviously get destroyed with using dams. And here in Alberta, we don't have, I mean, maybe if you want to use, like, I don't know, there's a couple of smaller rivers here that you could probably dam that aren't going to be producing too much electricity. But if you did, you're going to destroy the entire ecosystem. And the two other renewable energies, to my knowledge, are either solar or wind. And the big problem here is that all the flat land in Alberta has either been developed or is part of Crown land. And so are you willing to chop down and destroy all the biodiversity to build more solar and wind power plants? Or are you going to do the other strategy and get rid of the farmland and replace that with the renewable energy? So in my opinion, there's no land to actually develop to put these new areas unless you're willing to suffer the consequences of losing biodiversity or the production of food. And especially here in Alberta, where we can't have big hydroelectric dams, then you're going to have to make a sacrifice. And especially, I'm sorry, one last thing, for solar energy, the very big problem here in Alberta, because half the year is either under smoke or under clouds because it's raining. And so the actual yield coming out of solar plants are going to be incredibly smaller compared to, I don't know, Florida or any areas where you're going to be getting a lot more sun. So we lose. It's a disadvantage to us that we're actually not getting as much electricity because of that.
Well, there is a third option for getting renewables into Alberta. There is a third option that I don't think people are considering. So you know what they're doing with the phone lines, so to make it so that way phone line poles are not getting knocked down by things?
Making out of metal now. Or underground.
Well, yeah, underground. We could put fusion reactors underground, and then we could run the lines to people's houses directly, so that way we don't have to sacrifice farmland or sacrifice anything else. We can, like, I think that, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the situation, but, like, couldn't we do that?
That's a very libertarian approach. But is fusion necessarily fully renewable, though? Because, I mean, at that point, you might as well just go full nuclear at that point, then.
Well, the thing about fusion energy is the cleanest form. I mean, China's almost cracked the code on this one. So that's actually an issue I have with modern Canada, is you have the federal government selling us and our talent to other countries, which means Canada doesn't make anything anymore, and Canada, doesn't get to take credit for anything anymore, which is just so sad. But fusion energy, in its concept, is quite literally the single cleanest form of energy we could ever have, and it just keeps going. Like, fusion energy is going to be the future. So that's a part of the reason why I think Canada needs to.
You'll hear no complaints from me about nuclear energy, man. Like, I support it 100%.
And I think we need to take it a step further, because our electric cars, we need too many rare earth metals that poison and rape the land. I think the solution to the car problem is hydrogen-powered cars. Is there any sellers of hydrogen-powered cars?
There's a couple of people who try to make some designs, but I'm assuming ExxonMobil would not be too happy if they kept on trying to develop something like that.
Well, that's too fucking bad. You know what the government should do? I think personally the government should offer grants to companies that could crack the code on making affordable, reliable hydrogen-powered cars, because the only reason why people are still driving gas cars, besides their own emotional connection to the cars, is because of the fact that there's no good option for renewable cars, energy cars. So we need to lead the charge on that front as well, right? We need to actually.
But then that brings us back to the original conversation of we need to get rid of damn lobbyists because, like I said, you have ExxonMobil, which controls a majority of the oil industry here in Alberta, and obviously they're the biggest supplier of oil in the United States and across the world. So you got to deal with them because they're definitely going to be lobbying the government full send to make sure that that never ever happens. So that's another obstacle that we have to fight as younger people as well too.
Yeah. Oh, Michael, since you're a libertarian, libertarians broadly support tax cuts, and in some cases they, in some cases libertarians think that taxes should just be abolished altogether, and that taxation as a concept is theft. What's your stance on that?
Talk taxation. I know some very educated anarcho-capitalists that would love to debate you on why we should have no taxes, but my position is this: the problem is that we have entangled ourselves in a web of financial debt. And so we've kind of pushed ourselves into a position where we kind of unfortunately need taxes because if we don't, the theft that's going to come out of inflation or extortion to pay off that debt is going to be worse than what we have right now. So I think we could theoretically get to a point where we have zero taxes, but we need to get our house in order first, which is a decade or longer project that we need to cut spending to be able to cut taxes, because you can't just cut taxes if we have all this exorbitant spending, because you're just going to get more taxes later down the line, or the government will take out a loan or print money, and we don't want that. We don't want any of those three things to happen. So the thing is what do we do? At bare minimum, we need to have, I don't like the Doge system. I hate what Elon Musk did. But something along those lines where we need to have better auditors to make sure that our money is actually being spent properly, not being wasted, because we see quite a bit. I've worked under the Taxpayer Federation where I see it happens all the time. Millions of dollars go into wasteful projects. And then from there, we need to make sure that private alternatives or individual alternatives are better or cheaper than the public alternatives would be. And I think that's a good way to, like I said, start mixing possible alternatives to make things better, like healthcare is an example. It's a provincial issue, but I think a hybrid system of both public and private healthcare could balance each other out. And that's kind of where you need to go to be able to get lower taxes so we're not spending as much. And like I said, it's a hard project because, like I said, the government is trillions of dollars in debt. We spend almost $500 billion every single year, and we owe billions and billions of dollars in bonds. So how do you get yourself out of this? It's a hard question. I'm hoping Mark Carney figures it out. He's obviously probably not, but if we don't, we're going to get ourselves into a worse position that taxes aren't even going to matter anymore because we're going to be living in Zimbabwe where your dollar is going to be worth $1 billion now. So.
And then we're going to be using American dollars. And you know what? Despite the fact that I'm not a liberal supporter anymore, and despite the fact that I am not really a big fan of what Mark Carney's doing, you know what? Bought his book. Haven't started reading it yet, but you know what? I want Mark Carney to succeed. I want our prime minister to succeed because when he succeeds, we succeed. You know, that's kind of just a nonpartisan thing. Like, even if fucking Pension Polyev was running the country, you know what? I would want him to succeed for our country's sake, you know? I'm not that, I'm very progressive, I have my choice beliefs, but a lot of other beliefs would prove that I'm not as partisan as people, I'm less partisan than people give me credit for. I
tried to educate Mark Carney on the issues of central banking and making sure the currency is actually worth a bit, and I actually gave him. Okay, it's not letting me send it. I actually gave him one of my books, actually, and I don't think he read it. I think he threw it in the garbage, but I'll send a photo here in a second. I'll send a photo here in a second. He came to the university, and I gave it to him, and he told me, and I quote, "Don't read or don't believe everything you read in this book," which is a Austrian economics book for dummies, which basically talks about how if we don't get spending under control, it becomes a problem for the individuals. If we, like I said, if we are spending more money than we're making and we're in debt and we have to pay that money somehow to be able to keep our services up, that's going to hurt the individual, whether it be through inflation, bonds, or taxation. It's going to hurt people. And so I hope to God he reads the book. I'm praying like he didn't throw it out, but we need it desperately.
Yeah. I almost had the chance to meet Mark Carney back during the 2025 election. Sadly, though, I was actually hungover because I was out partying the night before. He went to Durham College's Whitby campus, and again, I had a chance to meet him, but again, I was hungover. So by the time I had woken up, I missed the event entirely, and I was so sad about that because it would have been cool to get a selfie with him. And I was actually writing a piece for my journalism class about Mark Carney's housing platform, which I can't publish now because by the time he got elected, that became wildly outdated, but I wanted him to read it and see if it was any good. I'm still proud of the piece, despite the fact that I no longer stand by it. I still have it in my archives in case I need to, like, use it for anything. So, there you go. There you go. But, like, I want Mark Carney to succeed, and Mark Carney as a PM, he will be judged by the success he has. Doesn't matter what came before or after, he will be judged by the success he has. But in terms of your ideal Canada where taxes, with your stance on taxes, with lowering them, when you lower taxes, who benefits from that? And when revenue drops, how do you keep schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, from the public level running? How do you actually keep things running with lower taxes? Because from what I see, austerity leads to cuts.
Well, who's benefiting from lowering taxes? Well, I mean, anybody will benefit from it. I disagree when conservatives talk about lowering taxes and they only lower it for the top 1%. I think that's completely unfair. When we have workers that could very well be taking advantage of having lower taxes, where if you work on oil fields, if they make, I don't know, 6-figure salary, boom, 50% of your income goes to taxes, and you suddenly start working 20 weeks out of your year, start working for the government, not for yourself, and that's completely horrible in my opinion. Then you ask me about healthcare, education, and roads. Well, on the roads fact, we're paying all this money, the highest we've ever paid into taxes in Canadian history right now, and I don't see a single damn road being built in my region. Like I said in some of my speeches, there's some towns in this riding that have had the same roads since the 1960s, since the town was originally founded. That's the same roads they're using. They haven't had any new asphalt on it, had no new roads. And obviously, education and healthcare are a provincial issue. So why are we paying massive exorbitant amount of federal taxes if they're actually not even the ones responsible for dealing with those issues? It should be the provinces. And on top of that, we're still dealing with high taxes provincially as well, too. So where the hell is the money going? You can't keep blaming everything on roads, healthcare, and education when there's clearly not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem.
Well, in Ontario, we have that exact issue where right before summer break happened, there was a situation where Ford was asked about, I don't remember what he was asked about, but a Liberal MPP rightly asked him about something stupid, some stupid initiative he had. I don't remember what it was. I think it was the bike lanes, but don't quote me on that. And, Buddy had the audacity to sit there and talk about the damage Kathleen Wynne did when it's like, sorry, you have been the premier for almost a decade. And you ever seen the movie A Bug's Life, Michael? You ever seen that movie? There's like a really good quote in that movie where Kevin Spacey's character, great villain, by the way, says this line. I don't remember the exact quote, but he says this one quote about the fact that when you're a leader, everything is your fault and you don't get to blame other people. And that's actually one of the issues political aristocracy enables. I mean, in Ontario, you'll have, despite the fact that Doug Ford has been the premier for almost 10 years, and despite the fact that the Conservatives have led Ontario for most of its history, somehow every pothole and every shortcoming is the fault of a party that has... Some people still blame the fucking Ontario NDP for issues that they haven't contributed to because they haven't governed since the 90s. And although we maybe disagree on the terminology we use, ultimately speaking, Michael, I think we'll agree on the way government should run. In terms of government should run... Like, I've proposed my idea, I'm sure you've seen, about how I think we should do citizens' juries, so that way, every single thing an MPP or MP wants to do, or an MLA wants to do, it's subject to a public vote, and if they want, they spend all the money on their taxpayer-funded credit card, they should have to get the people in their riding to vote in favor of them getting more money, so that way the people there can ask a question of, like, wait, what do you need more money for? Where's the money going? That's actually kind of the sad thing, because I'm not MAGA, by the way. I'm very against MAGA, and I think
you're the member of the Future Party, man. You're a centrist. Of course you wouldn't be MAGA.
I'm not a centrist.
You open up your party platform, man.
I thought
They're
I've told
supposedly
you.
a centrist party, so.
I know, but I thought I told you that I was a part of the Canadian Future Party because I political outcast and I wanted a good because ultimately speaking, my goal beyond partisanship is to push for public good, and I was looking for a vehicle to push for public good, and I figured the CFP would be a good vehicle for that. But the thing about MAGA is they're stupid. They care more about whether transgender women have the right to use the bathroom than they do about the economy, and that's part of the reason why Doge was such a big failure. Because despite Elon Musk's Doge did not save Americans anything in taxpayer money. In fact, if anything, American tax dollars have gone up since Trump has became president. And, you know, especially if you believe the whole idea that inflation and tariffs are a form of tax.
Yeah.
I mean, tariffs quite literally are a tax. You know, they're a tax on the importer. Like if you're a small business, you got to pay these taxes on imports because of Trump's ridiculous ideology. So I'm
and it's
firmly
also
against
tax on the
MAGA.
consumer
But
because,
ultimately
as we
speaking,
probably know, the business is going to push that cost onto the
Yep.
consumer to pay for it. So that means not only does the business have to pay that tax, but also the consumer has to pay it in whatever exorbitant price increase they get. So it goes both ways as well, too.
and and that's why mass tariffs as a whole are just completely stupid, and that's why every time the American you know, William McKinley, I think it was, that Trump said he based it on, McKinley by his second term got rid of the tariffs because of how bad they were for the American economy. And how funny do you think it must be for the Trump supporters who sat there and we're like, you know what, I'm against the abortion stuff, but I want the price of eggs to go down. You know, how funny do you think it is for those people who, you know what, abortion's being banned, America's a theocracy, but you know what? Trump said he would get the egg prices down in 24 hours, and after a couple months of him being elected, egg prices are like twice as much what they were under Biden. I'm not against the idea of a government efficiency you know, system and practice where people are, you know, audits and dealing with spending, but I think the centralized bureaucracy is the issue with it, and I think that you know, citizens juries are the answer to that issue. You know, I think citizens juries are the are the answer.
What libertarians believe is
question.
that we should get to a point where that shouldn't even be necessary, because I shouldn't actually care who actually wins an election. It should be that like basic that we get to a point where I shouldn't care at the end of the day who wins an election, because really they're not really going to affect my day-to-day life. The fact that there's still a danger that we still have to have committees and people watching over politicians proves first and foremost why having politicians doing stuff like that is dangerous. Because at the end of the day, even if we have a good stream, like I was arguing with Grant about this in Toefield during the Toefield debate, and the problem is, even if you have a good government, you have a very good government for 12, 16, heck, you could have it for 50 years, all it takes is one administration to bring it all down, and then they use those same powers that you claim are for good are also going to be used against us. And I don't want that. I don't ever want to a point where the government has powers to be able to ruin my currency and ruin the hard-earned money that I've earned just because they signed a piece of paper. It's ridiculous.
You know, before Mark Carney came around and got like your Mulrooney era conservatives and some NDPers on board to vote for him, I read a poll from CTV News in late 2023, early 2024, I think it was, and the CTV News poll revealed, you know, back when Trudeau was still leader of the Liberal Party, that over 94% of Liberal Party supporters, I think it was, you know, were only voting for Trudeau, not because they liked Trudeau, not because they liked his policies, but because they wanted to keep Pierre Poilievre out. And, I mean, you know, when Pierre Poilievre's creepy MPs are sitting there on Nate Erskine-Smith's podcast talking about how they want to get rid of abortion rights, and how Poilievre himself is sitting there, you know, at the time by the day talking more and more about how he wants to repeal people's rights. He wants to deport people for practicing their right to free speech against a country like Israel, which, by the way, last I checked, we're not Israel, we're Canada, so what the fuck? And how he wants
off
to
topic. I think at some point, I think the way that we have made this interview, I think we should have a podcast at some point rather than interview, because I think me and your dynamic works way better with a podcast rather than an interview. That's all I was just gonna say.
Yeah, well, you know what? You have contact with me, so if you ever want to do stuff like that, then we're more than welcome to. But we'll talk about that another time. Yeah, but like I was saying, you know, how many people do you think voted for Aaron O'Toole's more progressive brand of conservatism, but would not vote for Polyev because he went on tirades about transgender people and how, by banning transgender women, that's what the big focus? Like, what the fuck? How many people do you think, like, stuff like that is a non-starter for me. I would not ever vote for someone who says stuff like that, because I think every single person has the right to freedom, bodily autonomy, and I think the government needs to get the fuck out of people's pants, broadly speaking, and I think that should be a
You're
non...
secretly a
That
libertarian.
was
I
an
knew it all
understanding.
along, man.
No, it's like this was a non-partisan idea
Well,
back in the 80s. Like, it was famously
Dominic
Pierre,
wants us to
no,
still be
even before, it
slaves,
was Pierre
though,
Elliott
so
Trudeau.
you can't stop that.
Well, I don't agree with Dominic on everything. You know, I like if you'll find X posts where I disagree with him on certain things. Like, you know, there's a lot of things I don't agree with Dominic on. I mean, I respect Dominic for having some level of principle to an extent, right? Like, there's things I respect about Dominic, but you know, here's the thing, broadly speaking, it doesn't matter if you're liberal, conservative, NDP, or Canadian Future Party in my case, if someone asks you to name one thing you dislike about your party leader and you cannot say that thing you dislike,
Yeah.
it's a fucking cult. Like, I can't even really ask you that because the Libertarian Party of Canada has a very decentralized approach, so leadership of the Libertarian Party isn't even applicable to you, so I can't really ask
Like
you
I said,
that.
there's always
From what I
something
know.
you can complain about bureaucrats or politicians. I can name 5
Yeah.
things that I probably want to change about myself. Nothing in politics is pure. That's another reason why I separate my religious beliefs from politics, because politicians aren't pure. They're human. They
Yeah.
sin at the same time. So it's a very big issue where, yeah, I agree. You shouldn't put any politician or any bureaucrat on a
Yeah.
pedestal, because they're gonna have faults. And you're right. If you can't see an issue with your party or your bureaucrat or politician you love, you got a freaking problem, man.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually what
Yeah.
drove me away from the Conservative Party, because I actually used to work with the Conservative Party, worked with Stephanie Kuzy for a little bit,
Ooh.
and I always like to believe, when I defend or believe things in my mind, this might
Yeah.
make me sound a little bit crazy, but I have a debate. No, listen. I start debating with I debate with
I'm listening.
myself on why do I believe these things. Can I actually get
Same.
to a point where I defend why I believe the things that I do? And if it gets to a point where I can't convince myself of why I'm believing those things, I'm not going to support it anymore. And with the Conservatives, it just got to a point where I'm like, why the hell am I still supporting these guys? Because there's not a damn thing in here that can convince me to still stay with them.
Yeah, that was actually what got me. Like, Jagmeet Singh is one of the earliest inspirations I have. You know, he's one of my earliest heroes, and you know what? He inspired me from a young age to be a better man. So I will always respect him on that metric alone. But in terms of his policies, once the 2025 election came around, he had done everything wrong. He didn't get his campaign off to a good start. So what does he do when Mark Carney comes along? Instead of actually criticizing Mark Carney's record, he immediately goes off and one thing he did that I even have this stuff saved on my laptop still because I was really pissed when this happened. He made the NDP made this social media graphic and they posted it. It said Petro Carney. They like photoshopped the Petro Canada logo to say Petro Carney, and they were talking about how Mark Carney privatized Petro Canada, which, you know, just one issue. Mark Carney didn't join Petro Canada until 12 years after it was privatized. Like, this was during the Mulrooney years. So unless Mark Carney is a fucking time traveler, that was just a blatant fucking lie, and the NDP, by doing that, was insulting people's intelligence by making a lie like that. And, you know, he just doubled the fuck down, and he just kept going. He kept going, and by the time the debate came around, he didn't look like a warrior sticking up for the middle class. He looked like a fucking jackass. So I reluctantly joined the Liberal Party, and I voted for the Liberal Party based on... I probably would have voted Liberal anyways, because my local Liberal candidate, Bridget Gerard, very, very lovely woman. Great person. If I could have... Even if I didn't like Carney, I would have voted for her anyways. Great candidate.
It's just, in my opinion, like, I don't want to get off topic, but I think the New Democrats suffered from the same issue.
Yeah.
Like, I'm friends with a lot of New Democrat leaders here at the University of Calgary, and I think they suffered the same problem. I was screaming at them for 2 years that there were some problems with Jagmeet Singh and that his balanced or sometimes softer approach to things was going to be the end of the New Democratic Party. I've been warning them for like the last 2.5 years about this, and now suddenly they're shocked when their party is no longer has official party status. So I agree with you. I think, yeah, the cult status exists on all levels of party ideology lines. So yeah, 100%.
Like, you know, even when my series was still called Orange Wave with Will Adams, and most of the episodes were either, like, back then I would make a lot of episodes defending Singh, because you know what, a lot of people gave him unfair criticism, so I would defend him. I would say, you know what, maybe you should look inward before throwing stones, right? Because, you know, I would call out the fact that the Conservative Party was taking credit for Singh's ideas, yada yada, but, you know, if you were to have asked me in that time period to name something I disliked about Singh, I would have been able to do that. I would have been able to say things I dislike about him. Like, for example, like right now, if you were to ask me something like that, I'd say, I think his, like, emphasis on wearing Rolexes is kind of stupid. Like, low-hanging fruit, but, like, what, you're the leader of the socialist working class party and you're flexing how much money you make? And the fact that he was inconsistent, like, which is it? Do you want to be angry, Tom, or do you want to be a symbol of hope? Like, you can do both. No, sorry, you can do one or the other, but you cannot do both. And that's why by the time during that one video where he was like, well, say it to my face, you fucking coward, it was like, to most people, it looked inconsistent, because he had spent most of his career sitting there trying to be the symbol of hope, but then he starts sitting there being confrontational. So it's like, you know, it makes people think he's inconsistent. But my point broadly being is people should not have to vote for people they do not like, you know, the best of the worst, just because they're scared, genuinely fearful of what one man or one woman or one human in general is gonna do for their rights if they get elected. Like, that should not be something people have to worry about. People should be able to go to bed at night not being a target of the government. And it doesn't matter who you are. You should be able to go out, speak your mind, be able to go to bed and not be worried about being fired. You should be able to, you know, go out in public. You should be able to take a shit in a public bathroom without being worried that you're going to be arrested. Like, these are things we should not be worrying about in the 2020s. I mean, arguably speaking, the 1990s in some areas were more progressive than the 2020s. And that's fucking embarrassing. And that's something we got to deal with. Like, I got to give it to you. But this is a pretty, you know, I actually do agree with you. Maybe we should get into, maybe you should get a podcast with me. I mean, I know a guy who wants to start one, so...
If you ever want a crazy red-headed libertarian on your show, just let me know, man.
I will. You know, Michael, thank you for sitting down for, you know, what I hope people will interpret as a real conversation and not just a campaign pitch. I mean, you know, this has been a delight. Politics in Alberta feels like a crossroads. You know, it's at a crossroads between the old guard, the separatist fringe, and new voices like yours. So, since, you know,
Sure.
Final question. What's one thing you want voters who watch this episode to remember about you when they head to the polls? You know, when they head to the polls and they ask themselves, why should I vote for Michael? What are you going to say to them?
I'll give it off of a little bit of a speech here, if you don't mind. I think there's a really good thing that came out of this by-election is the fact that we're having to write in the candidate's name rather than just click a box. So you actually have to get impersonal and know the names and the people that are running to represent you. I think this is a really good thing because you actually get, for the first time, to vote for a choice because you like the person to represent you rather than the party to represent you. It's not a blue rock or a red rock anymore. You like Pierre Poilievre, you don't like him. You like Darcy, you don't like him. You like Michael Harris, you don't like him. It's not you're voting for him because he's libertarian, you know. And I've been very active in this campaign. I haven't been idle, even though the media would like to say it's only Bonnie Darcy and Pierre Poilievre being out there and doing stuff. I've been.
You mean Bonnie?
Yeah, I've been just as active as Bonnie has been in this election, despite what the media would like to say. Yeah. And if you believe in the ideas of liberty, family, and individual independence, I'd ask that you stand by and support me. At the end of the day, even if I don't win, even if I'm not here to form a majority government, your voice and your vote are able to send a message to Ottawa that we don't want to be taken advantage of anymore. Yeah. We don't want Alberta to be just treated as a cash cow for the East anymore. We want better representation, and we want the individuals to be heard when they don't feel like they're being heard right now. That's all I have to say, man.
And I mean, you know what? You know what? I actually did contact some other candidates. You know, I tried contacting Jonathan Bridges, Grant Abram, Darcy. I have yet to contact Bonnie, but everyone I've contacted did not even reply to the email I wrote. So, you know, this is what this show is for. I mean, that's why I've gone independent from partisanship with my name, and I've just made the show about me. You know, it's not Orange Wave with Will Adams anymore. It's Adams Tonight, because simply put, my endeavor with writing and with podcast hosting is I want to cover the stories that mainstream outlets are ignoring. And you're one of them. Like, credit where it's due. I have seen you on social media, and I've seen that you've definitely been out there. Your campaign might not be as organized as Poilievre's or Bonnie's, I guess, but, for all its faults, you're actually getting out there and you're talking to the people. So, you know what? Regardless, that's a respectable thing. Then that's something that we need to see, because I want to see politics return to it, the grassroots level. And maybe if you could win, maybe it'll be the start.
If I had a $2 million campaign budget, I think that like Pierre Poilievre is running with, I think that I could do some pretty damn damage to this riding. Because I mean, I consider myself a good organizer, but the one thing that's stopping me, and I believe the Libertarians, from being able to win this election, in my opinion, as anything, is always comes down to money. We're dealing with a lot of we're dealing with a lot of competitors that are spending millions of your taxpayer dollars to be able to keep running and representing this riding. Look at a candidate that's putting his own money and his own private party funded supplies forward to be able to actually run an election. I'm not being funded by lobbyists. I'm not being funded by bureaucrats. I'm not being funded by the party elite. I'm here representing myself, representing the party, and that's all we're out here doing. So there's quite a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
I think my odds are pretty obviously stacked against me for this election, but we're going to keep going. I'm a young guy. I'm going to be out here for at least another 60 years, so you're stuck with me.
Yeah. Like I said, thank you for coming onto the show. It's been an absolute delight, and I wish you the best
Thank
of
you,
luck.
man. I appreciate it.
That was awesome.